A loved one moving into your home always feels like the beginning of something bright, long-awaited, almost sacred. You're handing them the keys not just to a door, but to your life, your heart, your most intimate space. Elisaveta happily took this step, anticipating cozy evenings and shared breakfasts in her country cottage. But returning home from work turned into an icy shock. In a house smelling of someone else's perfume and fried onions, his mother was in charge, wearing her favorite worn robe. And when the woman tried to go to her own bedroom, but her fiancé, her man, blocked her path and growled like a stranger, "Don't go into Mom's bedroom." Hello, dear listeners. I'm glad to welcome you. I present to you a new interesting story. Enjoy listening. Elisaveta met Yaroslav at the end of October, when Tomsk was already shrouded in a grey shroud of chilly rain, and the ancient streets smelled of wet leaves and the inexorably approaching Siberian winter. The party was hosted by Ksenia, her old friend, a student who now worked as a manager at a large construction company. She was the life of the party, loving to gather people at her place on holidays and, for no apparent reason, throwing noisy get-togethers with songs and guitar playing and conversations until dawn. That evening, Elisaveta arrived unforgivably late straight from work, not even having time to stop home to change out of her formal office suit for something more comfortable. She'd been putting together her annual report all day, her head buzzing with endless numbers, her eyes drooping with fatigue. My first instinct was to turn around and go home to my quiet cottage in Kopylovo, but Ksenia called 3 times, begging me to come. "Liska, you're burying yourself alive in your balance sheets and calculators," she screamed into the phone. "I miss you. Come over, you'll get distracted." I had to give in. My friend's apartment was cramped, noisy, and smoky. 20 or more people were crowded into the living room, sitting on the couch, on the floor, on the windowsills. Someone was smoking on the balcony, blowing out clouds of smoke into the cold night. Someone was playing a board game in the kitchen. Ksenia greeted her with open arms, thrust a glass of tart red wine into her hands, and dragged her off to meet the guests. Most of the faces were unfamiliar. Elisaveta nodded politely, forced herself to smile, tried to remember names, but they quickly fled her mind. Yaroslav sat in the far corner of the sofa in the shadow, reading a book, completely absent from the general merriment. Tall and thin, he wore a simple dark shirt and jeans. His hair was cut short, and his face had a slight, older quality. Nothing special at first glance, but something in his detached posture, the way he held the book with such concentration, caught her attention. He wasn't staring at his phone or shouting jokes like everyone else, but simply sitting and reading, as if he were in another dimension, protected by an invisible wall. "This is Yaroslav," Ksenia introduced him, gently pushing Elisaveta toward the sofa. "He works at our company as an engineer. Smart, tough guy, but silent as a partisan. Wake him up, otherwise he'll just keep going with the book until the morning." Yaroslav raised his head. His gaze, attentive, gray, without a trace of idle curiosity, lingered on her face for a second, and he nodded briefly. "Hello." "Hello," Elisaveta replied, sitting down in the empty seat next to him. He smelled of good perfume and paper pages. "An interesting book." He showed her the cover, "Roadside Picnic by the Strugatskys." Elisaveta grinned. "Serious reading for a party." "A party in itself." "I'm on my own," Yaroslav shrugged. "Ksenia persuaded me to come, she said she'd be bored alone at home. So I came with a book." "It makes sense," Elisaveta nodded. "I'm not much of a fan of these kinds of events either. I came out of solidarity with my friend." The conversation started naturally, easily and naturally. It turned out they both love science fiction. They both hate noisy crowds, they both work until the end and value silence. Yaroslav spoke with quiet enthusiasm about his projects, about complex calculations and drawings, about how important it is to calculate everything down to the last little thing to prevent the huge building from collapsing like a house of cards. Elisaveta, to her surprise, shared stories from the accounting department about endless reconciliations, about people lying before submitting reports, and how sometimes a single figure can change the fate of an entire enterprise. They laughed at the same things and understood each other's jokes instantly. Time flew by. When Elizaveta glanced at her watch, it turned out they had been talking for almost 3 hours straight. The guests were already starting to leave. Ksenia, passing by, beamed with satisfaction and winked discreetly at her friend, as if to say, "I told you you'd like it." Yaroslav offered to walk her to the car. They walked along the night street, illuminated by the occasional streetlight. He was silent, his hands in his jacket pockets. And this silence was comfortable. Only when they were right next to the car did he say that it would be nice to meet again, maybe go to a movie or just have coffee. Elizaveta, without hesitation, agreed and dictated her phone number. He saved it in his contacts, said a short goodbye, and left without turning around, into the darkness of the October night. Their first date took place a week later. They met in a small coffee shop in the center of Tomsk, the same one where Elizaveta often dropped in after work for a cappuccino and an almond croissant. Yaroslav arrived on time, which pleasantly surprised her, and brought a book with him as a gift. A collection of Ray Bradbury stories, he said, because she mentioned at the party that she loved his prose. "Thank you," Elizaveta said, genuinely surprised, accepting the book. "I really did say that, but I didn't think you'd remember." "I remember details," Yaroslav answered seriously. "I'm used to it from work. If you miss a little thing, the whole project can fall apart." The second meeting, the third, the fourth. They strolled through the autumn city, rustling fallen leaves in the camp garden, went to museums, watched old films in an art house cinema. Yaroslav turned out to be truly well-read and could talk for hours about literature, history, architecture. He knew where in Tomsk ancient wooden mansions with carved window frames had been preserved, what buildings were erected before the revolution, bridges were built during Stalin's time. Elizaveta listened to him with bated breath, forgetting about work, about numbers, about her constant fatigue. He was polite, attentive, never pestering her with indiscriminate questions about her personal life, never pressuring or rushing things. After each meeting, he walked her to her car or to the entrance of her rented apartment, never stayed late, said goodbye briefly and left. The perfect man, Elizaveta thought. Calm, balanced. So easy to be with. A month later, they began seeing each other more regularly. Yaroslav would visit her at work, and they would have lunch together at a nearby cafe. He would talk about his colleagues, about setup issues, about how yet another client would change a project at the last minute. Elizaveta would complain about endless audits and rush jobs, about how the director required reports due yesterday, but the data was only sent today. They understood each other, supported each other, and encouraged each other. By the end of November, it became clear that this wasn't just a pleasant acquaintance, but something much more serious. Yaroslav suggested they celebrate New Year's together. Elizaveta agreed, although she usually celebrated with friends or went to her parents' house in Osino. This time, she wanted to stay in the city, spend the evening with Yaroslav, and feel like she had someone close to her. They celebrated New Year's in her city apartment, a small one-room studio apartment she'd been renting for 5 years. The cottage in Kopylovo was too far from work, and Elizaveta only went there on weekends, and even then, not every week. Yaroslav arrived with a bouquet of white roses. He helped set the table with roses and a bottle of expensive champagne, expertly cutting salads while Elizaveta fussed with the main course. The evening passed calmly, without fuss or pomp. They simply sat together, watching an old Soviet film, listening to the fireworks thundering outside the window, clinking glasses at midnight, and making a wish. Yaroslav hugged her, kissed her, and said he was glad they'd met. Elizaveta felt warmth and an unusual lightness in her soul. In recent years, she'd been living as if on autopilot. Work, home. Work. Few friends, no personal life. Yaroslav appeared in her life like a gift from fate. winter flew by. They saw each other almost every day. Yaroslav met Elizaveta's friends, and she met his colleagues. Everyone said they looked good together, that they were perfect for each other. Elizaveta thought so herself. With Yaroslav, it was comfortable, calm, no drama or scandals. He wasn't jealous, didn't make scenes, didn't demand constant attention. He was simply there when needed. In the spring, Yaroslav made the proposal. It was unexpected, without any pathos or unnecessary words. They were walking along the Tom embankment. It was warm, the sun was setting below the horizon, painting the water in golden pink tones. Yaroslav stopped, took a small velvet box from his pocket, opened it, and handed it to Elizaveta. "Marry me." It sounded not like a question, but a statement. Elizaveta looked at the ring, simple, white gold, with a small but clear diamond, and felt her heart pounding somewhere in her throat. "Seriously," was all she could manage to say. "Couldn't be more serious," Yaroslav nodded. "I'm not one to joke about such things." She agreed. The ring fit perfectly, as if he'd already known the size. Later, Yaroslav admitted that he'd asked Ksenia, and she'd given him a hint. Elizaveta laughed, touched by such care and attention to detail. They decided to have the wedding in July, 3 months later. There was enough time to calmly prepare everything. Elizaveta didn't want a lavish celebration, and Yaroslav wasn't thrilled with the idea of throwing a feast either. They decided to limit it to close friends and relatives. 40 people max. In mid-April, Elizaveta suggested living together before the wedding. They wanted to get used to each other and figure out how things would be in everyday life. Romance is romance, but living together is something completely different. "I have a cottage in Kopolovo," she said as they sat in the kitchen of her rented apartment. "I inherited it from my grandmother. She died 2 years ago. Everything is registered in my name. The house is small, but cozy. We can live there. And it's a long way to work," he asked practically. "I have a car. I can give you a ride if you need it. It's only 15 kilometers from the city." Yaroslav thought for a moment, calculating something in his mind. "It's about 40 minutes by train," he finally said. "But that's no problem. We can drive sometimes, if you don't mind. Deal? I'm currently renting a one-room apartment on the outskirts. The landlady requires a month's notice before moving out. I'll be free just in time for the beginning of May." "Great," Elizaveta said happily. "I'm going away on a business trip to Novosibirsk next week for 3 days. Can you move your things quietly and get settled during that time? I'll leave the keys." She did indeed inherit the cottage. An old but sturdy house in a quiet holiday village. Her grandmother lived there for the last 20 years of her life. Elizaveta visited her every week. After her grandmother's death, she registered the inheritance and transferred all the documents to her name. The house was small, 1-story. 3 rooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, a plot of 600 square meters, a well-kept garden with apple and cherry trees. In the summer, it was quiet and beautiful, smelling of flowers and freshly cut grass. It was the last thing left of her grandmother. Memories of childhood, of summer holidays, of apple pies and quiet evenings on the veranda. Now Yaroslav was supposed to move here. When she brought him to see the house, he was pleased. "It's a nice place," he said, looking around. "Quiet, calm, and the air here is different from that in the city." They walked through the rooms. Elizaveta showed him the master bedroom, a large, bright room with windows overlooking the garden, with a spacious bed and an antique oak wardrobe. "We'll sleep here," she pointed out. "A guest room for friends, if anyone comes." "That makes sense," Yaroslav nodded. They drank tea in the kitchen. Elizaveta showed him where everything was, how to turn on the appliances. Yaroslav listened attentively, memorizing. "I like it," he repeated as they sat on a bench under an old apple tree. "Thank you for offering to live here. This is our home now," Elizaveta smiled, feeling absolutely happy. On the last Monday of April, Elizaveta met Yaroslav early in the morning before leaving on a business trip. He came to her rented apartment to pick up a set of keys to the cottage. 2 keys on one ring, one for the gate, the other for the front door. Elizaveta put them in a small envelope and handed them to Yaroslav. "Here, take this. I'll be back Thursday evening. Make yourself at home. There's food in the fridge. Bed linen in the closet. If you need anything, call." "Good. Have a good business trip," he said, putting the envelope in his pocket. "I'll move the things in these days. Meet me on Thursday." They quickly said goodbye. Elizaveta was in a hurry. A taxi was already waiting downstairs. She got in, waved to Yaroslav, and drove away. 3 days of intense work lay ahead: negotiations, inspections, reports. Her mind was full of work, and there was no time to think about home. The business trip had been unusually stressful. Elizaveta lived in a hotel, got up early, and returned late. Her partners were inquisitive, demanding clarification on every line of the contract, double-checking every figure, asking hundreds of questions. By the evening of the 3rd day, she was exhausted and dreamed only of getting home as quickly as possible, taking a shower, and falling asleep in her own bed. On Thursday evening, she took the commuter train to her station and got into her car. It was already dark, and the streetlights were coming on. Elizaveta drove almost on autopilot, thinking that Yaroslav was waiting for her at home, that she could finally relax, have dinner together, and tell him how the business trip went. On the way, she stopped at the supermarket and filled 2 heavy bags with groceries. She wanted to cook something delicious to celebrate their little move. As she approached the cottage, Elizaveta felt a slight thrill. How had he settled in? Was he bored alone in the empty house? She parked the car by the gate, picked up her bags, and walked to the porch. Already in the hallway, she caught a strange, unfamiliar scent. Sharp, cloyingly sweet, somehow vulgar. It smelled like cheap perfume sold in underground passages. And there was also a smell of fried onions, something heavy and greasy. Elizaveta frowned, but decided that Yaroslav was probably cooking dinner, and the perfume could have been left over from one of his colleagues who had come to help with the move. She took off her coat, about to hang it on the hanger, and froze. On the hook next to her things hung an unfamiliar women's jacket, a colorful leopard print with large gold buttons. Definitely not hers. Elizaveta never wore such jackets, preferring subdued colors and classic cuts. An unpleasant apprehension pricked her heart. There was a stranger in the house. Guests. But Yaroslav hadn't warned her. Elizaveta walked into the living room, still holding the heavy bags in her hands. What she saw left her speechless for a few seconds. In her favorite chair, the very one by the window where it was so pleasant to curl up in the evening with a book, sat an elderly woman. She was plump, with prominent features and a shock of gray hair dyed a poisonous red, styled in an old-fashioned updo. She was wearing Elizaveta's terrycloth robe, beige, with elegant embroidery, which she had brought from Turkey 3 years ago. Expensive, soft, and beloved. The woman was holding a huge sausage sandwich and chewing loudly and measuredly, staring at the TV, which was showing some cheesy series. The volume was cranked up, and the actors' voices thundered so loudly it was deafening. On the coffee table in front of the chair sat a plate of half-eaten sandwiches, a mug with traces of tea, and crumbs scattered everywhere. Elizaveta stood in the middle of the living room, clutching the handles of her bags so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The woman didn't even turn around or say hello. She continued chewing and staring at the screen, as if Elizaveta weren't there. As if it was she, the mistress of the house, who had invaded someone else's space, and not the other way around. Yaroslav emerged from the kitchen with a cup of tea in his hands. He wasn't even surprised when he saw Elizaveta, didn't even raise an eyebrow, just grunted, looking off to the side. And it was Mom who had arrived. She'd come to visit for a week. That's all. No explanation, no apologies, not a word about warning or asking permission. Just a statement of fact, as if they were talking about the weather. Elizaveta opened her mouth to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. Mom. A week. In her house, in her chair, in her robe. Yaroslav walked past her and handed the cup to the woman. She took it, without taking her eyes off the screen, and muttered something unintelligible. Yaroslav returned to the kitchen as if nothing unusual had happened. Elizaveta put the bags on the floor, her hands shaking. A wave of neither anger nor indignation slowly rose inside her, but a kind of cold, detached amazement. How could this be? How could you bring a stranger into someone else's house without even warning them? How could you let her walk around in someone else's robe, occupy someone else's chair, and dominate someone else's kitchen? She took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. Okay. Maybe this was some kind of emergency. Maybe Yaroslav's mother was having problems and had nowhere else to go. Maybe he was just confused and didn't think to call. She needed to talk calmly, figure everything out. Elizaveta walked into the hallway and headed toward her bedroom. She wanted to change, take off this stuffy blouse and tight skirt, put on something casual, then take a shower, wash away the fatigue of 3 days, tidy herself up, and only then talk calmly and like an adult. But before she could touch the door handle, Yaroslav jumped out of the kitchen and blocked her way. He stood right in front of the door, arms outstretched, as if blocking the entrance to a restricted area. Don't go in there, he barked so loudly and angrily that Elizaveta flinched. This is Mom's room, don't you understand? For a few seconds, she just stared at him, not believing her ears. Mom's room? Her bedroom, the master bedroom in her own house, was all she could manage to squeeze out. Mom sleeps there, Yaroslav repeated a little calmer, but his voice still sounded undisguisedly irritated, as if this Elizaveta was behaving inappropriately. I put her in the big room. There's a comfortable bed there, a closet for her things. She needs space. She's an elderly person. She's uncomfortable on the sofa. You'll spend the night in the guest room. There's a normal sofa there. Elizaveta felt something inside her breaking. Slowly, silently, like a thread that's been pulled too tightly. Not with a crash, not a roar, but quietly. Something inside just clicked and fell into place. She looked at Yaroslav, at his face, which showed no trace of embarrassment or guilt, only irritation and some strange, impenetrable confidence in his own rightness. He truly believed he had the right to dispose of her house, her things, her life. He brought his mother here, gave her the best room without even thinking to ask, and now he stood here, blocking the mistress of the house from entering her own bedroom, and yelled at her like she was a naughty child. In the guest room, Elizaveta repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. In my own home, in the house that belongs to me. Well, yes. Yaroslav shrugged, clearly not understanding what she was getting at. For a week, you can squeeze in. Mom has come from far away, she needs peace and quiet. Then she'll leave, you'll go back to your room. You won't die. Elizaveta smiled bitterly. What touching concern. She turned and looked into the living room. Yaroslav's mother, as if nothing had happened, was already finishing her third sandwich. The TV blared, crumbs fell onto the carpet. The terry robe, which had been hanging neatly in the bathroom that morning, was now wrinkled and stained with something greasy. Elizaveta came closer. The woman finally paid attention to her, tore herself away from the screen and looked her over appraisingly from head to toe. Something unpleasant flashed in her eyes, arrogance and indifference. Hello, Elizaveta said in an even voice. I am Elizaveta, the mistress of this house. The woman chuckled and made another bite of the sandwich, chewing unhurriedly. Marina Viktorovna, she finally deigned to introduce herself. Yaroslav's mother. I've heard about you. Well, a girl like any other. The house, however, is old and needs repair. The wallpaper is peeling. The plumbing is ancient. Yaroslav said that you live here alone. Strange, of course. A young woman and without a husband. It's good that my son agreed to live with you, otherwise you would have spent your life alone. Elizaveta listened to this monologue and felt the cold inside her spread further, filling everything. So, here's the deal. Yaroslav's mother hasn't just occupied her house, she also thinks she's done her a favor. Her son, you see, agreed to live with her, a poor, lonely girl in a shabby house. I inherited the house from my grandmother, Elizaveta said, trying to keep her voice even. It's in excellent condition. I take care of it. And the robe you're wearing now is mine too. If you don't mind, I'd like it back. Marina Viktorovna looked at her as if Elizaveta had said something inappropriate, then she laughed briefly and contemptuously. A robe. Well, what pettiness. I thought I was just going to take a shower and change. I grabbed the first thing that came to hand. You're not greedy, are you? Yaroslav said you were a nice girl, hospitable, and here you have such complaints over a robe. Elizaveta opened her mouth to respond, but Yaroslav intervened again. He walked up to his mother and put his hand on her shoulder, as if protecting her from an aggressive bride. Liza, that's enough, he said conciliatorily but with a slight reproach. Don't make a scene. Mom is tired from the journey, she needs some rest. Let's have you unpack your things in the guest room for now, rest, and then we'll discuss everything. Unpack your things in the guest room in your own house. She is evicted to a tiny room where there isn't even a proper closet, only an old chest of drawers, and the master bedroom is given to a strange woman who didn't even say hello when the owner entered the house. Elizaveta glanced around the living room. On the coffee table there were dirty plates and candy wrappers. In the corner there was a large travel bag of Marina Viktorovna's, things spilling out. She went into the kitchen. The scene there was even sadder. The sink was overflowing with dirty dishes. On the stove were frying pans with the remains of fried potatoes. The table was stained. A mountain of garbage in the trash can. 3 days. Yaroslav and his mother had been here alone for just 3 days. And the house had turned into a pigsty. Elizaveta leaned against the doorframe. Fatigue fell upon her at once, a heavy weight pressing her to the floor. She wanted to sit down and cry, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly straightened up. Thoughts began to form in her head, clear and cold. Yaroslav had brought his mother here without warning, installed her in the master bedroom, and sent his bride, the mistress of the house, to the closet. He thought she was soft, pliable, convenient. He thought she would swallow it because she loved him, because the wedding was in 3 months. She would endure it, spend the night in the guest room, then her mother would leave, and everything would be fine. But nothing would be fine. Elizaveta understood this with absolute clarity. If she remained silent now, endured it, it would only get worse. Yaroslav will decide that she can be manipulated, and his mother will come again and again, take the best room, command, and run things. No, that won't happen. Not now, not later. Elizaveta took her phone out of her pocket. Her hands no longer shook. Inside, everything was calm. Even too cold, the measured calm of someone who has made a final decision. The first thing she did was call Ksenia. Her friend answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was sleepy. Liska, what's wrong? It's midnight. Ksyusha, I'm sorry, Elizaveta spoke quietly so they wouldn't hear from the living room. I need your help. Urgently. You're a lawyer. Hearing the seriousness in her friend's voice, Ksenia instantly woke up. What happened? Elizaveta briefly outlined the situation. Ksenia listened and whistled. Wow, what impudence. Listen, legally it's simple. Your house is registered in your name. Yaroslav is not registered there, he has no rights to the property. He is, essentially, a guest. You have every right to ask him to move out immediately. If he refuses, call the police. They'll file a report and throw him out. And what if he says I invited him myself and gave him the keys? So what? An invitation doesn't give him ownership. The keys can be taken away at any time, and the locks changed. Legally, you're in the clear. Go ahead. And just in case, record the entire conversation on your phone. It'll come in handy if he starts asserting his rights. Thank you, Ksyusha. The next number she dialed was a locksmith. Viktor Petrovich, a reliable man of about 50, had helped her with renovations in her cottage 2 years ago. Viktor Petrovich, good evening. This is Elizaveta from Kopylovo. Remember when you changed my locks? Of course I do. Hello. Is something wrong? I need all the locks in the house changed urgently. Can you come today? It's a bit late today, but I can do it in an hour. It's a late-night job, though, so you'll have to pay extra. No problem, come on over. Elizaveta put her phone back in her pocket and left the kitchen. Nothing had changed in the living room. Marina Viktorovna was watching another TV series. Yaroslav was sitting next to her, scrolling through his phone. Idyllic. Elizaveta silently began unpacking her grocery bags. What's wrong with you? So gloomy? Yaroslav asked, looking into the kitchen. Are you offended or something? No, she looked him straight in the eyes. I just think the hour flew by quickly. When the doorbell rang, Elizaveta went to open it herself. Viktor Petrovich was standing on the threshold with a suitcase of tools. Good evening. So, we need to change the locks. Yes, the front door and the gate. You can start right away. Who is this? Why a locksmith? Yaroslav stuck his head out of the living room. We're changing the locks, Elizaveta answered calmly. Why? I have the keys. That's exactly it, she nodded. That's why we're changing them. I don't like it when strangers have my keys. What strangers? I'm your fiancé. Was, Elizaveta corrected quietly but clearly. Was the fiancé. Yaroslav froze. The smirk slid off his face. He stepped closer. Liza, stop fooling around. I understand you're offended. Okay, my fault. You should have warned me about Mom. But you understand, she had nowhere else to go. Well, to move in for a week, it's not fatal. Extremes, Elizaveta smirked. Yaroslav, you brought a stranger into my house without asking permission, gave her my bedroom, my robe, evicted me, the hostess, to the guest room. And you think I'm the one causing extremes? But this is my mother, he was indignant. We're planning to get married. We need to get used to it. Get used to the fact that they'll throw me out of my own bedroom? Elizaveta shook her head. No, thank you. I've changed my mind. I've changed my mind about getting married, living with you, having anything to do with you at all. Marina Viktorovna came out of the living room, still in the robe. What's going on here? She asked imperiously. Elizaveta is changing the locks, Yaroslav muttered. She says the wedding is off. What kind of whims are these? Marina Viktorovna flared up. Girl, are you out of your mind? My son is marrying you, giving you his last name, and you're throwing tantrums. First of all, Elizaveta said slowly. I am the mistress of this house. Secondly, no one was going to provide for me. I earn a good living myself. And thirdly, take off my robe immediately. Yaroslav, come on, let's calm down and talk. He tried to take her hand again. No, Elizaveta snapped. You pack your things and you're both leaving now. Why is that? Marina Viktorovna flared up. We're not going anywhere. Yaroslav has keys. He lived there, Elizaveta corrected. The locks are changed, the old keys don't work anymore. So either you pack your things voluntarily, or I'm calling the police. Make your choice. The front door is ready. I'm going to the gate, Viktor Petrovich added quietly, without looking up from his work. Yaroslav and his mother exchanged glances. It finally dawned on them that Elizaveta wasn't joking. Liza, this is nonsense, Yaroslav's voice sounded offended. Because of one evening you ruin our whole life. It's a pity, she agreed. It's a pity that I wasted half a year on a man who doesn't respect me and my boundaries. But better late than never. Pack your things. I'm not going anywhere, Marina Viktorovna insisted. I'm tired. I'm a sick woman. Elizaveta took out her phone and started dialing. Okay, then I'm calling the police. Don't you dare, Yaroslav barked and stepped forward, trying to snatch the phone. Don't touch me, Elizaveta warned coldly. Otherwise I'll add to the statement, threat of physical violence. Yaroslav froze, breathing heavily. Marina Viktorovna suddenly turned around, went into the living room, grabbed her travel bag and started throwing things into it. Let's go, Yaroslav, she threw to her son. There's no need to stand here, ungrateful. I've seen people like that. Proud now, and then she'll be crawling on her knees apologizing. Yaroslav nodded slowly, picked up his bag, and stopped in front of Elizaveta. Will you regret this? He said quietly, but threateningly. Maybe, she shrugged, but that will be my regret, not yours. They headed for the exit. Marina Viktorovna pulled off the robe as she walked and threw it on the floor. Yaroslav led his mother out the door. They disappeared into the darkness. Elizaveta stood on the threshold and felt how it became lighter with every second, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The next day, Elizaveta, having blocked Yaroslav's number in all messengers, went to the courier service office. The wedding ring, packed in a small box, was sent to the address of his rented apartment. A cold, silent, and final gesture. Returning home, she began to work in the garden. Working in the fresh air was calming. A week later, Ksenia called. Liska, is it true that you broke up with Yaroslav? Lord, forgive me, I was the one who introduced you. Ksyusha, it's not your fault, Elizaveta answered firmly. You couldn't have known that he would try to evict me from my own bedroom. It's better to learn about a person before the wedding than after. That's for sure. You know, there are already rumors at work. They say that you kicked him out and changed the locks. Let them talk. The talk began, and it was far worse than Elizaveta had imagined. Yaroslav and his mother started a rumor that she was a calculating swindler who had swindled him out of money for house renovations and then kicked him out, stripping him blind. Elizaveta listened and felt a cold, calculating rage rising inside her. She didn't bother making excuses to everyone. She sat down at her laptop, took screenshots of her bank statements for the past year, scanned the documents on the house, and wrote a clear, calm post on social media, making it publicly available. Lately, I've been hearing rumors spread by my ex-fiancé, Yaroslav. I feel it's necessary to set the record straight. The house I live in is my inheritance. Yaroslav lived there for 3 days without investing a penny. Our relationship ended due to his disrespect for my privacy. Please refrain from gossip. I'm ready to provide documents to anyone interested in the details. Ksenia called again in an hour. I saw your post. Well done. Yaroslav has already deleted everything. He was probably scared. Let him be scared, Elizaveta replied coldly. If he tries to defame me again, I'll post everything with dates and amounts. The rumors died down as quickly as they began. Life was slowly returning to normal. But the story took an unexpected turn. One July day, there was a knock at the gate. A fragile young girl with frightened eyes stood on the threshold. "Hello. Are you Elizaveta?" "I'm Daria. Yaroslav's fiancée, that is, an ex-fiancée." Elizaveta let her into the house. Daria's story was almost an exact copy of her own. A quick affair, a proposal, a move to Yaroslav's rented apartment, and Marina Viktorovna appearing on the doorstep. "She took the only bedroom and sent us to sleep on a folding bed in the living room," the girl cried. "She bossed me around, humiliated me, and Yaroslav was always on her side. Yesterday I left, and he shouted after me that I was as hysterical as you." "I'm not hysterical," Elizaveta said calmly. "I kicked him out along with his mother from my own home." She told her story. Daria looked at her with amazement, and then with admiration. "So it's not me who's crazy. Thank you. Really, thank you. I was afraid I was going crazy." "You're not crazy," Elizaveta assured her. "You just ended up with the wrong people. Yaroslav isn't looking for a partner. He's looking for a servant for himself and his mother." They talked for a long time. It was a strange conversation, full of female solidarity and bitter understanding. As they said goodbye, Daria hugged her. "You are very strong. I will try to be like that." "You can do it," Elizaveta nodded. "The main thing is not to be afraid." A year passed. October again shrouded Tomsk in fog and rain. Elizaveta did some cosmetic repairs in the house, updated the furniture in the kitchen. The house was transformed, it became even more cozy. Ksenia was throwing a party again and invited her. Elizaveta was hesitant at first, but then decided to go. There was no way to hide from the memories. The evening was fun. Yaroslav, of course, was not there. Elizaveta talked with friends, laughed, drank wine and felt light and free. "You've changed so much this year," Ksenia told her, walking her to the door. "You've become stronger, more confident." "Life has taught me," Elizaveta smiled. She drove home through the night streets and thought about how much everything had changed. That evening a year ago seemed like the beginning of something important, but it turned out to be just a lesson, harsh but necessary. She learned to say no and protect her boundaries. As she drove up to the house, Elizaveta saw the light burning on the veranda. She always left it on. It's nice to return to a lit house and know that your walls, your warmth, your comfort await you there. She entered, locked the door behind her with a new lock, and put the kettle on. While the water boiled, she stood by the window, looking out into the dark garden. There was no one here but her. No strangers, no intrusions, no manipulations. Just her, her space, her rules. Perhaps someday she would meet someone who would understand the value of personal space, respect, and equality. Someone who wouldn't try to take over her home, her life, her soul. For now, she could just live for herself, enjoying the peace, freedom, and tranquility. Elizaveta chuckled in the darkness, remembering how Marina Viktorovna had prophesied loneliness and unhappiness for her. Well, loneliness was there, but it didn't make her unhappy. On the contrary, it gave her strength and an understanding of her own worth. Better to be alone than with someone who doesn't respect you. She slept in her own bed, in her own bedroom, in her own home, and no one could take that away from her anymore. She was the mistress of her own life. And it would always be that way. If you liked this story, subscribe so you don't miss new heartfelt stories and leave a comment. I'm always interested in your opinion.